Let's start with the pattern, and we'll kind of work our way backwards. So I'm waking up, it's 2 p.m., and there's a mixture of dissociation, meaning when I stay up late and wake up late, there's a biological sense of jet lag. And so I kind of think of it as a membrane of insulation between me and my reality. And the more I stay up and kind of push into exhaustion, the thicker the membrane when I wake up. And so that's where we are right now. And then there's the question of, what am I doing and how do I do it? Well, as I go to bed at a reasonable hour or think of going to bed at a reasonable hour, the response is a rev up of anxiety. So I'm here and I think, well, I could go to sleep. There's nothing stopping me. There's no noise. So I could go there. Now there's an instant uptick of so I think, well, I don't have to go to sleep. And I can do something else. Now, I can't do everything, but there are a few things that I can do. I can listen to an Audible book. I can play chess. I can watch certain movies. I can do internet research. I can write a chapter in a book. These are things, and I can sometimes, it depends, sometimes I can make videos of this nature, and sometimes I can't. Meaning there's a disconnect between the compulsive energy to do something and actually having to make contact with the world, to look through the eyes of others, which is necessary to communicate. To reach someone, you have to imagine them and be talking to that. And so I can do that sometimes, and sometimes I cannot. And sometimes I think it would be nice. Sometimes it starts with, let's do this. Like, let's go make a cup of tea. But on the way to make a cup of tea, then I think this, and on the way to that, then I think this, and then I'm into this frenetic energy. So that's one thing. Then I come back. And so there's a couple of detour points. So there's, let's have a nice night's sleep, anxiety, and it's in the low belly, and kind of up here. So there's 2 points of vibration. And then I can think of a secondary thing. Okay, I'm not going to go to sleep. Let's make a cup of tea. So that was a thought yesterday. In fact, several times throughout the day, I thought, let's make a nice cup of Earl Grey tea with milk. My favorite is the Earl Greyer tea, which is, it's just so much bergamot scent. It's a delicious tea with some organic local milk, and so it's a wonderful, peaceful thought. So then I move on the way to that. Let's say I press the kettle button to heat up the water, but then I go and do something else. Let's say I pour the tea, and then I go do something else and find the tea is cold. So there's shunt off points from there. So there's the restfulness of sleep, and then the build up of anxiety, and then there's the idea of an enjoyable something, and then that migrates into a more restless energy. And so what I did last night and what I'll typically do is I'll have an oversight, meaning there will be a witness part that is checking in that the general direction is constructive. And what I mean by that is I might be writing a book on happiness, which my mind tells me, well, that's, if you're going to be frenetically doing something, you might as well be doing something useful, as opposed to gambling at, money away at a casino or, which is the exact same energy, but it's not, it's a different result, meaning my mind doesn't think that gambling is beneficial for me or anyone else. Nobody benefits other than the casino owner if I gamble. And so I have, that kind of thing is very easy to turn off. But the reality remains that that's kind of a subroutine, that the main routine is shunting away from, certain states of relaxation and pleasure and success. I'm shunting away from that in order to enter this speed of energy, and then to persist, meaning there's not enough until I reach a state of exhaustion. And it's a physical kind of draining out of, there's a certain chemical exhaustion going on there. And when I reach that exhaustion point and I start to get sick, so hay fever symptoms elevated, little bit of mucus in the back of the throat, slightly sore throat, slight headache. So I start to drift towards sickness, the kind of sickness that comes from stress. And at a certain point in that frenetic energy, I will decide that that's enough. And usually the pivot point is I will say that I'm really sick now. If I don't stop right now, I'm going to get really sick. I don't want to be really sick. And so I will go to bed. Now, there is then, as soon as I'm in bed laying down, the sickness, all the stress goes down by about 30 to 40%. And so I'm no longer at the point of about to be sick. So then I start a second wave of compulsive behavior. Well, why don't I do this? Maybe I'll play chess or listen to Audible or do a few extra errands or whatever that I just thought about. So that's then a secondary wave. So then I might spend an hour and a half in bed, bringing maybe a 3 a.m. to 4 a.m. to 5 a.m., right? Now I'm staying up until 5 a.m. Now, when I can't push into that further, then I will cuddle my wife, and which is great fun, which, I could have been doing the whole evening. Though when she falls asleep almost instantly, and when I'm anxious in that place and I try to connect with her, I find it very unsatisfying that she's basically verbally and otherwise telling me, go away, I'm not interested, just by tuning it out. And so that makes me feel anxious. So that's usually, if I try that, then I will usually go off and try to do something else. And so then I go to sleep, and then I wake up, in this case, 1:32 in the afternoon. And there's a bit of anxiety because now the anxiety pushes to am I going to have enough time? Has something happened while I'm sleeping? I run a business, and is it too late? And if I push into exhaustion I have to sleep for roughly 8 hours without interruption. And it's best if I wake up on my own accord. Otherwise, I can have a headache or something like that. So I start to kind of wake up a little bit, but I feel tired from pushing into that. Thankfully, my dog helps wake me up at this point. He's usually licking himself leaned up against my back. So that at some point becomes more fun and interesting than just staying asleep. And then I have a remote to my cassette player, which I bought specifically to play Lazaris tapes. And there's a little context around that. But then I can press the morning tape and listen to a morning episode. But then there's some days, like this day, where the anxiety, the stress, etc., is such that I'm not ready to kind of step down and listen to the morning meditation. So I want to move. I want to get up and move around. But I also feel a little bit anxious, a little bit fearful, a little bit unheld, uncontained. And so, for example, today I pressed the morning player, I turned up the volume, and then I went to do something which is part of that frenetic activity, which in this case was to kind of research a glamping tent for a Costa Rican adventure. And so there's kind of going off to reach to research a glamping tent. Now, with the distraction of researching the glamping tent, one part of me was then able to enjoy the Lazaris morning tape because my attention is divided. One part of me can be focused on the energy of the research, which then provides the context for another part of me to enjoy the Lazaris meditation. Because if I didn't split myself in that way, this part is not feeling safe to relax. And so this part wouldn't actually get to enjoy. What I would do is I would use mind drifts to create that compulsive energy. And I would notice it, but I would not be able to do anything about it. Meaning I would say, oh, you're not listening to the meditation, you're doing this. But I would not be able to drop down. And so that's, what I would, which makes it, I would say, more frustrating than getting up and moving around. Now, I've created a routine that involves going out for a walk. So sometimes I'll push through this by going immediately out for a walk in the neighborhood. And then that may get me through this particular wave of anxiety. Sometimes I'll go straight to a job site, and by the time I've sorted that out, that has gotten me through because there's a membrane. There's a membrane that I've got to get through in order to be present and feel enjoyment for the day. And the question is, how am I going to get from this state over to this state, to this state? How am I going to do that? And there's a circuitous path, meaning there's something that is at the core of this, which feels dread, feels horror, feels lonely, feels awful. That's at the core of this. And I've got to get from here to here without directly looking into the eyes of Medusa and being turned to stone. That's the quest. That's what I have to do in a roundabout way. And I can't know exactly what it is that I would see because I will be turned to stone. And so I've got to do all of this without actually seeing why I'm doing it, which thankfully and problematically creates its own anxiety, its own. To know that there's something there and that I can't look at it, and that all horror will break free if I do look at it, which on some level, the counterphobic part of me then says, okay, let's figure out exactly what's going on. The trouble is $150,000 of therapy hasn't figured out what's going on. 40 different therapists hasn't figured out what's going on. 1,000 hours of Lazaris meditations hasn't figured out what's going on. Healing the inner child for hundreds of hours in that particular series. Healing the inner adolescent for hundreds of hours has not figured out what's going on. And this creates, its own kind of frustration, because meanwhile, Lazaris is over here saying it's easier to succeed than it is to fail. If you really want it, you can have it. We're entering the new world, a new kind of human being, blah, 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 blah. So Lazaris is off, endlessly going on about this, as this has been going on, ever since I can remember. And that's frustrating. Now, the body keeps the score, enters in at age 40, 45, or, age 41 or whatever, as a very useful clue as to what we might be dealing with. It's called PTSD, it's called complex PTSD, it's called trauma, it's called childhood abuse. And so, very useful to actually understand what those words mean, to understand how they affect the body, and to understand that you cannot deal with this terrain alone. I agree. So good context here. So a great kind of movement forward. The terrain has been identified. The terrain has been identified in a way that is far more useful than trying to look at payoffs and negative ego and all of this stuff, which never, as I say, made any traction. So I had a sense, okay, now I know what I'm dealing with physiologically, psychologically, and the fight, flight, freeze of the reptilian brain correlates, of course, with the Greek myth of Medusa, of being turned to stone, which correlates with the Greek tragedies, which correlates with the Greek traumas. During a period of Greek history, the Greeks were fighting 7 battles on 7 fronts. Every single person in Greece knew someone, was married to someone, had a son, had a child, had a father who was cut to pieces. So we're dealing with trauma, we're dealing with PTSD. And the tragedies, the Greek tragedies, the plays, etc., were the way to indirectly touch and integrate and understand what was going on without being turned to stone, without moving into the compulsivity of fight, flight, and freeze with no release. They they had a mechanism as a community that we lack today, which is theater and expression, to look at the reptilian brain indirectly through the mirror and not be turned to stone, but be able to cut off the head, to release the power of the traumatic event of Medusa. Now, I do not trust people in this terrain. It was people, in this case, parents and teachers and therapists. It was people who induced this horror, induced this pain, systematically, repetitively. One could even say compulsively, induced this state. And it is people who have turned their backs to this state, to the grief, to the despair of this state ever since. In other words, my cult has the capacity, has the ability, the technology, the talent of inducing deeply traumatic states in its children, in me, but lacks the competency, the empathy, the intelligence, the technology to heal the PTSD, the complex PTSD, the grief, the distrust, to heal what it induced. And this is consistent with Einstein's observation that it takes one level of intelligence to cause a problem, but an entirely new level of intelligence to get out of it. The same level of intelligence that it takes to traumatize and induce terror, distrust, shame, and grief in an innocent child is not the level of intelligence needed to heal that trauma, needed to restore that trust, needed to bring light into the darkness created. It's not enough. And so we deal with these things peripherally. They shape our lives, meaning, I would do just about anything to avoid this pain if I thought it would actually work. And I will do just about anything to avoid this pain temporarily if I don't think it'll do permanent damage. So, overeat, sure. Let's give it a try, right? Let's give that a try. Well, I feel a little bit better after my belly gets to a certain size. I can't feel that empty feeling for the moment. Okay, well, that's progress. That's better than anything my cult has offered. And what's the problem? Well, I get fat. My body suffers. But not half as much as that horrible feeling. Well, that shortens your life. Who cares, right? In a cult that cannot deal with the biggest crisis of human experience, maybe a shorter life is a better life than a chronic, helpless, horror-filled life of being yo-yoed around by something that not a single person in the planet, not a single person will meet me here, will respond here in a competent, mature, and loving way. Oh, they're out there, people say. Show me. Show me one person. Well, yeah, right. They're out there. You say, well, how about you? Why don't you become that person? No. Why not? How do you know they're out there when you're so committed to not going into this terrain? Well, they're off again, right? You go look for them. I'm not going to get anywhere near that, right? And so that gets tiring after, 40 years of people basically doing that in different ways, or therapists promising, all you have to do is pay me a few $1,000s and we'll get to the bottom of it. And where's the refund when you don't? Oh, you're a difficult patient. You must, all these other people got, but not you. You. So let's blame the patient, right? Let's blame the child, right? But keep the money, right? But blame the patient. It's not very fun dealing with any of that. And, why doesn't Lazaris talk about these things head on with people and track them? For someone who's been going for 20 years and then finally gets enough and just gets out of there because it's painful. Lazaris says, what is pain? Pain is the gap between what you long for and what you have. Well, Lazaris has increased the longing. A life filled with more abundance than you could ever imagine, a new age, a new kind of human being. It's right there. Lazaris has increased the longing. Lazaris has increased the expectation. But what about the shame-based, traumatized concept synergy employees that are paid poorly and then discarded without a pension? Doesn't do much for that, does it, right? Or the suicide of Michael, or the clinical obesity of Penny going into a codeine vodka overdose. It doesn't do much for that. Or the questions about it that can't be asked in the forum. It doesn't do much for that either, right? Lazaris doesn't do much for the intersection of the felt human experience over time with our techniques work. They just don't work for you, or you, or you, and they don't work here, and they don't work here, and they don't work here, and they don't work here. And none of them seem to work when they get close to this area. Oh, they work fine out here when you're far away from this particular state. But once you get in near to this state, well, they just don't work anymore, right? Well, that just happens to be the single most important state. Meaning if they cannot deal with the deepest psychological and physiological trauma, and all wounds lead back there into that dark void of terror, of dissociated, shattered identity, looking into the eyes of a giant that is out of control, lost in rage and hate and terror, who wants to kill you because you're bringing up that feeling in them and because they can. How does an infant survive that encounter and remember it when it is such a traumatic, such an identifying, shattering event? How? Well, Lazaris has touched the periphery with language. the crisis tape, self-punishment, ending pain, ending guilt, envy, jealousy, envy, and rage, scars of the past. But all that's over now, right? The past has ended. It's just, it hasn't ended for anyone that we know, right? And you can play semantics and say, no. You know, when you were born, when you were 10 years old, these painful feelings and all that were in the past. But now, they are being projected into the future. They're no longer in the past. They're only in the future. And you feel exactly the same way and have exactly the same problem. It's just we've relabeled it in the past and we've labeled it in the future. Ta-da! And your point is, Lazaris, it's now in the future, and now you can't deal with it in the future. Now I can't deal with it in the future, but we're making progress, right? We've relabeled it. It was in the past. Now it's in the future. Bureaucratic problem solving 101, courtesy of Lazaris humor. It's just, it's not getting any better. In fact, in some ways, it's getting worse. Certain things that you can very easily, when you're frantically getting money for rent and doing this, start to bubble up when there's no more external crises. See, most of this started hitting hard when I had more money than I needed, no debt, savings, a quote, delightful job that didn't feel delightful because I was always near to these traumatic events. I can't tell you how many people project the ideal life onto me. It's just not very fun when that has nothing to do with my own experience of my life that is so ideal. In fact, the crisis hits when I can't eat a better diet. I can't imagine a better job. I'm already going to the best places on the planet. And all that remains is this terror, is this dread. There's no more excuses to why things should feel this bad. But they do. In fact, they are feeling worse because there's no adrenaline crises on the outside to give me an excuse not to be with these horrific feelings. Well, then just do another Lazaris tape, right? Do another. And there's so many, right? Well, maybe it should do this, maybe do this. The frantic energy of advice givers who don't want to get anywhere near this terrain. It's comical, but it's also disgusting, right? Hey, you there. Come on, back. Okay, you've given me the tape. How about you sit down and actually, let's have a chat about this terrain. No, I've got to go do my meditation. No, sit here, you goddamn dumb fuck, and let's have a chat. Well, immediately they go into their own trauma, right? Oh, I don't want to look at it. Oh, no, right? So is that fun? No, it's not. Okay, fine. Get out of here. But no more tapes, eh? Take your goddamn bullshit and get it out of here. If you want to recommend medicine, be accountable, take the time to get a diagnosis, or get the fuck out of my space. Because I am tired of pretending that this stuff works so that you can feel helpful while being absolutely no help at all. And so that I can pretend that you're helpful so you feel better and don't have to deal with your own trauma, your own depths. I'm sick of that. You go play that game for another 10 years with your friends. Because I don't want to hear another tape that sets me up for shame when this bullshit doesn't work. Now, when I was 14 and suicidal, I thought there was something wrong with me. I'm doing this thing, but I must have payoffs. I must have this. I must have this. The same is true within the cult paradigm, right? When you don't have any money, when you don't have this, when you don't have all these various things, then the cult always tells you, well, if you will just do this and 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 do this, and the list goes on a few hundred points. But if you do everything on those few hundred points, you will then emerge victorious. You will be happy. It will be wonderful. And it takes, about 10 years to do all those points, but I did them. And I was more exhausted, more numb, in more emotional pain. The reality was idyllic, but it didn't actually feel any better. And there's so many tapes to get when you first discover Lazaris. Well, maybe it's this one, and 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 this one. And maybe when you realize that, because one of the most intelligent ways to look at any field, a doctor, a teacher, a whatever, a leader, whatever. First of all, you don't look at what they say, you look at what they do. Right? So if someone talks to you about blissful meditation and then frantically goes and makes 100 speeches so that you'll buy their meditation tape, you look at what they're doing. They believe in rushing around and selling easy lifestyles, but working really hard so that you'll buy the tapes. And it takes work. It takes a lot of work to get, to distribution and this and that and the other. And so, but if you actually look at what people are doing rather than what they're teaching you to do, you can usually get the same results as what they're getting. If you look at what they're doing when nobody's looking as a complete picture of the life, you will get the same results that they're getting, generally speaking. And they're not very positive, right? I don't want to end up like Jach. I don't want to end up like Penny. I don't want to end up like Michael. I don't want to end up like any of the Concept Synergy staff. It's far more crazy-making, in my mind, to be that close to the material and be so aware of what's not working inside and out. It's more crazy-making to see how many people are not making any progress in this and this and this and this. Is there one, two, three? Where are those stories that are, oh, you did this and this? You see, but I've also already had those stories told about me with that glow. Dane makes $400 an hour. He's a mystical landscaper. He travels the world. He eats the finest organic food. I've been put up on those pedestals. So what? Means absolutely nothing. I feel like this. I felt like this since I was 6 years old. And apparently that's now been put in the future, not the past, and I still feel like this. So, who gives a shit? Oh, you should meet so-and-so, they do this and this. You see, once I've already been a pedestal, one of the things that's interesting about being on a pedestal is nobody wants to actually see you. I can send out an email blast today and say, who wants to come and spend 3 or 4 hours understanding the nutty bits of why my life isn't working? None of those people who put me on a pedestal actually want to come and see that. You probably don't particularly want to watch this video. Most people don't. If they did, I wouldn't be telling a camera these things. I'd be telling actual human beings. I'd have actually someone to call who says, oh, I would love to hear how enraged and compulsive and frustrated and lonely and angry you feel. I would love to hear all that. Please just name the time and place and we'll meet. My goodness, this would be wonderful. I do not have a single person. Oh, I have plenty of people pretending that they want to engage. Dane, how are you? Do you have 2 or 3 hours for an answer? Silence. What's going on here? Hey, hope you're doing well. You hope I'm doing well. You'd like to compliment this little thing. You just wouldn't actually like to see what's going on with me today, right? It's very difficult to find a single human being because I'm terrified with what's going on today. Meaning there's a big part of me that's doing everything it possibly can to not see what's going on with me today. And there's a big part of everyone else doing the exact same thing. To me, that is not successful. I have the freedom. I could make 20 hours of these things. But I feel terrible at the beginning, during, after, and nobody that I know has the competency to actually look at these things. I mean, I've tried different things. I mean, there's some wonderful positive psychics and all that who will just start interrupting me around this and start telling me how wonderful this is going to be and that's going to be. It's just not particularly wonderful after you've paid them the $300. That absolutely none of that happens. And they become very defensive when you try and give them the statistical data, right? Is that wonderful to be scammed by a very positive psychic? Not in my book. Is it wonderful to be told how, all this could easily lift, except it hasn't for 40 years? But it could easily lift. Just increase your expectation, do this, whatever. It could just lift. It just isn't, but it could. Well, could you show me an example of someone in deep PTSD and trauma, etc., who has just lifted? And can I talk with them? Can I see, can they come into my sphere, and could we lift that together and track it and publish the results in a traumatic study? No. Why? Well, it doesn't work like that. But no. So are they being put up on a pedestal? Or are they afraid to go into the terrain? What? So this is kind of the core thing that all of this other stuff is kind of working around. And, if I look at it, I feel varying degrees of panic about all this, meaning I'm listening to all this, and I feel varying degrees of panic about it. I feel varying degrees of anxiety about it. Why? Well, I'm not competent enough to love, heal, respond as well as the traumatized parts of me require to transcend the trauma. I cannot love good enough for those parts of me. There's nothing bad about my 6-year-old being beaten. If there is something bad, you could say, what's wrong with you, 46-year-old, 47-year-old, 30-year-old? What's wrong with you that you can't respond to a traumatized 6-year-old? Well, I give you the question. We are a nation of traumatized 6-year-olds. Bullying, humiliation, sexual abuse, violence, raging, betrayal, lies, banishment, isolation, left alone with a TV instead of a human being, racism, sexism. We're a cult that is filled with these things. Where are the adults? Where are the people capable, competent to love these children? I haven't met them. No, I meet in nice New Age circles people that love everyone and do this and do that. It's a wonderful performance. I mean, it feels great to hear it. It's just, will you go and meet my bullied neighborhood 6-year-old and love them? No, they're too busy loving everyone. So the neighborhood 6-year-old stays crying. Can I intervene when the parent gets angry at me for trying to be kind to that 6-year-old? What if the parent beats the 6-year-old more to punish the 6-year-old because I embarrassed the parent by showing the parent that they don't know what they're doing, which they don't? What's Lazaris' solution for that? What's yours? Right? What about my own 6-year-old? Well, Lazaris did produce the tapes, 4 shame tapes, forgiveness tapes, 3 of those. Healing the inner child, healing the inner adolescent, healing the magical child. Now, Lazaris has said that the young adult is probably the most crystallized version of the negative ego. There's just no healing the young adult tape. Now, was there some lifting? Absolutely. My life is 30% better, roughly, by my estimation, because of the healing the inner child and healing the inner adolescent. So, great, 30%. Now, all we have to do is get the other 500%, and I would not be living in terror of a pain, of a dread, of a trauma, of a shame that I do not seem to be able to face alone, with or without Lazaris, right? As I get near that part, this panic explodes. My body tells me that I'm going to die. I don't have an answer to my body. I have an answer to my mind. My mind is not telling me I'm going to die. My body is telling me I'm going to die. And my body, you see, my mind ultimately sides with my body. Like it goes like this. Well, when I get near this thing and my body says, you're going to die, you're going to die, you're going to die, my mind can respond and say, okay, well, back off here. That's actually a pretty good approach. Or it can say, nonsense, body, there's nothing going on. You're not going to die. We're tired of being imprisoned by fear, and we're going to carry on. Well, how much dissociation can you handle before you actually do die because your body is convinced you're going to die? So if I'm driving my motorcycle, pushing into this terrain, and suddenly I leave my body, I have to give it to my body and say, you're right, we may die. In fact, I almost died right then. I almost died right then. I almost died right then. So even though nobody's coming at me with machine guns right now, even though everything else seems fine on the outside, the fact that I dissociate from my body as I get near this thought that I'm going to die means that I will actually die. Well, that's just a belief. Go fuck yourself, right? You have the motorcycle accident, right? It doesn't actually work. It doesn't work. If you turn to stone looking at something that you would need to look at in order to see whatever the belief might be, that you could, oh, there it is, it's that one. Great. It's just, I have never, in about 30 attempts, seen the slightest change going into the room of belief of this, other than my body saying, are you nuts? You're going to kill us, by pretending that reality is suddenly different. You don't see your neighborhood 6-year-old being bullied? You haven't read the reports of the Second World War? Some channeled idiot is telling you that the world is a new age? And you're not watching Ukraine? I mean, it's not particularly new. But a channeled entity tells you, right? You mean you're going to ignore all sensory data and listen to a tape? You're going to get us killed, says the body, right? My body gets more nervous if I go into the room of belief and say, people are cruel and sociopathic. Delete, people are loving and generous. My body goes nuts. Because if I behave consistent with that, I get hit hard. My body doesn't like the shock. My body doesn't like the feeling that I'm using a faulty map. My body can't stand putting blinders on and not seeing the observable patterns we've noticed for decades, body and I. body and mind, body and feelings. My body feels much more comfortable when I identify the threats and come up with a reasonable strategy for avoiding them, usually by making sure that my interests are not directly conflicting with another person's interest. That's, if I cannot figure that out, and my interests are clashing with another person, it's a statistical probability. I want this, they want this. It is a statistical probability, the more backed into a corner they feel and they are, that they're going to lash out in some way. I don't enjoy that. So I scan to where they're going to feel scared and trapped and tormented and this and that, the other, or they already feel that way and this and that, the other, and I try not to engage in that. Now, recordings like this break that pattern, and my body thinks I'm going to die, right? But at least we can be cognizant that this is going on. Because one of the crazy things that I feel and experience is I've paid attention to the Lazaris community in my interactions. And I would say 80% of the time or more, the people I meet in the Lazaris community have very overt or covert tells that tell me I'm not alone dealing with any of these things. I may be more successful than them on the outside, or I may be less, but that's not changing the state. The quickness if someone looks like they're going to discover something, the fear of being found out, the fear of this, the fear of that, the fear of not being positive enough, the effort to put on a good face for for show, for the community to look good, all of those types of things are going on all the time. It's rampant. It's nothing personal to the Lazaris community. It's just going on all the time. We're a cult of appearance. It's just that Lazaris has much higher standards, To appear good in the Lazaris framework, you've got a whole another 1,000 distinctions to work with and appear good in. So you're failing a lot more because your standards are much higher. I've never met a single Lazaris friend who's busted their ego, who's conquered their fear, who's not afraid of success, who's loving their inner child, who's dealt with their trauma, who's doing this, who's a wonderful parent, who's da-da-da. I've never met them. The strategies of coping with fear and grief and trauma and all that are different for each person, in or out of the community. But it is an important realization that the Lazaris community is not more evolved or less evolved as a statistic, is not more successful or less successful as a statistic. It's not happier or unhappier as a statistic. And one of the most delightful things after being tucked up in all these metaphysical cults for so long is to go out and meet ordinary people and find that many of them are doing wonderful jobs with their lives. Never done a meditation in their life. It's just so enjoyable to discover that. It's like you're not afraid that you're not a negative ego. What's that? What's that? What's negative ego? Relax, enjoy. It's like, oh my goodness. I'm the one with my head in the clouds. My favorite place to go is Thailand because anytime I talk about any of this, you think too much. You think too much. Smile, laugh, right? Get a massage on the beach. It works wonderfully, really, really wonderfully. Except then, frankly, I'm 300% happier in Thailand So it gets miserable to return to the US. But the underlying, power structure is still there. If I run out of money in Thailand, I am toast. It's part of the contract, part of the deal there. I cannot make money in Thailand. The statistics are very, very difficult of that particular thing happening. And the visa scenario is very, very problematic. It's a very expensive visa process. That'll change when I'm 50. So that is, a response. But it also, at some level, makes me feel very silly. To have spent more money on crystals at Concept Synergy than it would have taken to retire in Thailand. It feels kind of silly. When, that is just a tremendously abundant, happy energy. I am not sure if I can move through all of this in Thailand. I don't know. The data is compelling, meaning I've interviewed 40 expatriates, some who are there on holiday, some that are there for a year, some are there for 10 years, from all the major Western countries, including the US. And every single one of them, like the last American I met, every single one of them kind of comes to a consensus that Thailand is 300% happier than the US, which is that was my experience from the minute I arrived. It's incredible. And it is incredibly depressing to return back to the US, to kind of get the money to go back to Thailand. And then have it, all run out rapidly, mostly because I need the tap, so I have to leave an empty house and shut down the business. So, anyway, I did that for a while, but, that's, it's got unique benefits. And, the last American that I met there said, I was a nice couple. Said, we love Thailand. We're healthier. We've lost weight. We love the people. We eat better. We're surrounded in beauty. And what was a bit depressing as to watch the American cult was, I said, so you're leaving? He said, yeah, my company is moving me. So his company moved him to Thailand. And for 3 years, his life is dramatically better. And then his company is moving him back, and he's following the company rather than following Thailand, which is a very, very common thing. I've watched Americans do that same pivot, my entire life. They're so happy here, but they go with the flow of the cult to come here a little bit, and then they go off over here where they're miserable. So when I wake up with this state, when I feel these feelings, I have a range of things to do. I can go off to work and just get a move on and live through it. I've done that for years. I can do something addictive. I've done that for years. I can stay in this edge between getting sick and being healthy and just play that balance as its own distraction, and I've done that for years. I can see 1, 2, 3 therapists a week. I've done that for years. I can listen to Lazaris tapes all day. I've done that for years. I can do Lazaris meditations. I've done that for years. I can travel. I've done that for years. I can binge watch movies. I can do a whole range of things. But in that entire range of things, finding a competent human being who can love and be with that traumatized 6-year-old, I have not done that for years. I do not know where to find such a human being. I do not know how to become such a human being. I do not know if I can become. Trauma is one of those things, along with shame, which is a trauma that you need help with. Well, Lazaris has offered help about 10,000 times on 1,000 different tapes, listened to 10 times. The symptoms do not cessate more than the few minutes during the meditation, but there's also a little bit of dread at some point where, when Lazaris is saying it's so easy and all that, when there's this amount of pain at stake for this long, to receive help from Lazaris that is like a 20 or 30 or 50% reduction in pain for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, whatever, 3 minutes, 30 seconds, to receive that help, and then the pain comes back in the context where Lazaris is saying, we're loving you perfectly and wonderfully and everything you can imagine, but you are making it hard and blocking this for your payoffs. It's kind of a slap in the face. Now, Lazaris says this is for empowerment, and I would agree if I met people that were doing this much better than I was, and could explain that, I would kind of agree with that. But mostly I meet people who don't want to talk about this, who don't even want to look at it in themselves or in me or in the cult. And what about that 6-year-old that's being bullied down the street? What about the suicide rates? My mother was a pie-in-the-sky fantasy dissociative person, meaning she never wanted to see screaming children. So in her fantasy world, we didn't exist. And I realized that one of my deepest lonelinesses was being around people who were so committed to avoiding their own pain and suffering that they blocked out the existence of the very people they were hurting, in this case as an incompetent mother. It's incredibly lonely to be in the positivity of denial. And that's a lot of what Lazaris seems to be in. The New Age is here. It's been here for 20 years. Doesn't it feel new? No. It's like, Lazaris, don't go crazy in order to be consistent with your tapes that have nothing to do with what I was thinking of, feeling and experiencing, etc., based on before the gates of Sirius had opened and all this stuff. That just feels like an incredibly distracting delusion. Did Michael and Penny's suicide death occur in the future? The whole gates of all the information light? Was it a wonderful death because the gates of Sirius had opened? Would it have been just as wonderful if they hadn't, right? It's like, it's painful to kind of talk about all this in idealistic terms. It's very healing to, and I think that one of the reasons Jordan Peterson resonates, and I enjoy listening to him in areas at times, is because he basically says the exact opposite of Lazaris. Life is a catastrophe. It's a series of crises. People have really difficult things going on. If people get mentally ill or whatever, it's because usually the complexity of their lives and different things going against them have gotten so big and they just can't respond. And so they dissociate or addict or whatever. And Bessel van der Kolk's work on trauma and PTSD, it's incredibly grounding and helpful because it acknowledges the magnitude of what an individual is actually dealing with. It's somewhat patronizing or diminishing to say, oh, you could just have gone into the room of belief and your life would be completely different. Have at it. But I'm not seeing the fruits that I admire. I see pieces. I mean, I met a Lazaris client that I didn't end up working with, but I saw some neat pieces in their life. There's great art, for example. Looking at the marital dynamic wasn't impressive, wasn't horrible. It was, disappointingly normal, which I think most marital dynamics are disappointing, including my own. I mean, there's so many things I would like to work so much more. I just do not have the skill to find a person capable of that and to be a person capable of that. In part, for example, just the hostility that most Western women have towards the desperation that I feel, the panic I feel around this trauma. Most New Ager Western women, they don't want to deal with that. Oh, that's negative, don't want to deal with any of that. Well, the anxiety goes up when it's met with that dismissal, etc. In part because it's exactly what my mother did. She didn't want to deal with screaming children or whatever, and so she just locked them up or hit them or turned them away and enjoyed the New Age, went to read her metaphysical books, right? And so that's nearly killed us, right? It doesn't feel good. But that's a very common pattern to encounter. Or hatred, immense hostility for the scared little boy in every traumatized man, pretty much everyone. The scared little boy, tremendous hatred. Because the scared little girl in a traumatized woman wants an adult, wants a father to take care of her, and feels tremendous hatred that instead she is being asked, as a little girl, to take care of an immature father, a boy. There aren't enough adults to go around for either sex. I feel the exact same way towards my wife at times. Panic, desperation, and she's sulking, a 5-year-old little girl. It's like, there's no adults in the house. I'm furious. Of course she is as well. Why can't you grow up? Why can't you grow up? Well, can't one of us be an adult? No. It's pathetic, the deficit of adults. Well, at least we can laugh and joke about that, which most Western metaphysicians cannot, right? So it's a slow step away from mediocrity. Anyway, this is here, and positive law of attraction and all that types, of course, don't want to talk about any of this, which is lonely, is irritating because they live it. They just don't want to talk about it. And, of course, there are wonderful thresholds. I can do all kinds of great, quote, successes and all that, as long as they don't get near this particular thing. But it just makes me very aware of that. Like, I am aware, and have been aware for some time, that my entire life pivots around the need not to see certain things, not to feel certain things, that there are some things that are so horrific that I would literally commit suicide in a heartbeat, rather than be alone and shamed and left in those places as I was as a child. Well, that explains the suicide rate. It's quite intelligent. But it doesn't explain the entire collusion to not deal with this. I can't go to a compulsivity group in the San Francisco Bay Area, anywhere to deal with this. I also don't particularly like the whole, I'm not impressed with most therapists, having pushed a number of them and tried to see, is there anything there once I learned about the traumatic thing. It's a disaster in my eyes, because not a single one of my therapists introduced me to the traumatic paradigm. I had to find that out thanks to a stranger in a cafe. You're not introducing the traumatic paradigm to your clients when that's the underlying issue in most of their lives? No. So then I go back to the main 40 therapists, etc., to educate them that they should have educated me about the traumatic paradigm, since it's the only thing that is good science around this, and because their techniques didn't work, well, they don't want to know. Really? No, they don't want to know. That's not my focus. I'm not a trauma therapist. Yes, you're a therapist doing ineffective work in response to trauma. They don't want to talk about that either, right? It's quite disappointing. I spent a year trying to get a single therapist to try and actually come in and talk about these types of things on camera for some relief and context for other therapists and stuff. 150 therapists all had excuses, and they just didn't want to talk about it. And what I found very interesting was the only people who engaged, the therapists, they were interested in one thing: would this make them look good? Really? Sexual abuse, this and that, the only thing you're interested in is whether you're going to look good? Yeah. All of their questions were framed around, how am I going to look if we do this interview? It's their number one concern. And you're going to try and help other people, go outside of yourself and help other people in their most vulnerable moments. And they're going to pay you thousands of dollars, counting on you to do that. And you are so self-absorbed that your number one concern, the only questions you're giving me are about how you're going to look. How disappointing. That's what kids have to deal with in dysfunctional parents. The primary concern of the parent, how am I going to look if you do this? I'm going to punish you because you're making me look bad here. It's, how am I going to look? This is not a world of dreams and new human beings. It's a world of trauma, fear, shame, and how can I look? It's not that those other things aren't going on in the periphery. Just at the bottom, at the deepest level, I'm making subtle and major decisions primarily around this. And there is not a single human being that I know, or channeled being that I know, that can reliably respond to this. Now, I've done more than anyone that I know. I don't know anyone who's worked with 40 therapists. I'm sure I've met some people who've spent more than the $140,000 that I've spent. But I've also spent millions in not direct therapy, doing travel and this and that and the other. And, it's, if you take the summation, whether it's living at Findhorn or thousands of hours of meditation or this or that or thousands of goals accomplished, if you look at the summation, I don't know many people who have put in the hours and the money and the effort that I have to reach this point. And I do know that I'm about 20% successful. I feel worse than I did 20 years ago. That's not successful. It's just reality, The constant anxiety of being in this thing, the adrenaline addiction, I feel worse. That's my measure of success. So I'm failing by my measure of success, which is to feel sustainably better. Now I can easily look at this and I can say, but look, these are but look at all the thousands of things you accomplished. Yes, but I accomplished those things because I thought they would make me feel sustainably better, and they haven't. Well, look at all the growth and insights you've had. Yes, I have had thousands upon thousands of insights and awarenesses. But I pursued those insights because I thought they would help me feel sustainably better. Well, look at all the people you have helped. Yes, I have helped thousands of people. But I do not know if they feel sustainably better. And I have not been able to create sustainable relationships in which both people feel sustainably better. Maybe 1/10 of what I would like, so 10% success. Now, Lazaris says have low expectations and then you create more. It's not my experience. I have incredibly high expectations that almost nobody, including myself, comes anywhere near to living up to, and feel tremendous stress about it. And it doesn't help the process. So there's your high expectations, Lazaris. It's just not producing the effects that you said. It's leading to feelings of pointlessness and frustration and helplessness, because I have never had a relationship that reaches those expectations. And I've tried. My favorite country in the world being Thailand, I thought, let's see if I can find one person in Thailand, right? And so you go to the biggest dating site. Makes sense. So I sent out 5,000 interests. Why not? See who's interested. Okay. I was tired of all the misunderstandings culturally, so I wrote a book. These are all the things that I run into after 20 Thai lovers. These are all the things I run into again and again. You guys, as women, talk about this and this and this and this and this. Here's why it's happening. This is what's going on. Here's how Western men are trained to look at you. Here's how you're trained to look at yourself. Here's how you're trained to look at Western men. There's some disconnects, and you're not doing anything to sort those out. You're living the shock, the this and that, the other, but you don't have to be surprised. This is what's happening. So I wrote a book. And of course, they don't speak English, so I translated it into Thai. And of course, they don't buy books, so I gave it to them. Here's 1,000 people interested in me. Here, read this book. And I talked about myself in the book and where I'm a good fit and not. Now, 250 of them read the book, love the book generally, and write to me. And 4 of them actually have some discipline and interest in kind of connecting. So I spent time with all 4 of them. And it's a dismal reflection of what I would hope for. Dismal. One woman has a racist mother, so if we had a relationship, it would have to be a secret relationship because she wouldn't want to introduce me to her racist mother. Is that really the best I can dream? Out of 5,000 Thai women in the best country that I'd live in the world? No. I'm honored to introduce you to my mother. Oh, that's apparently too much to ask for the finalists of 4 women, right? So, okay, I'm not interested. If you're more interested in your mother's racism than me, off you go. Another woman, passionate lover, whatever, all that, but doesn't want to think, doesn't want to engage, wants to just explore cartoons all the time. I'd like to have a conversation. Not interested. Okay. Ideal physical lover, no mental relationship. Is that too much to ask? Apparently. So, strike 2, right? Another one. Puts her job and this and that and the other, is a lower priority. Then we come up with another one. Family absolutely hates it. Has a government job, has this, but she's absolutely fanatical about it. It's just the worst logistics I've experienced, I've come up with. But she is devastated if I say, no, I think these logistics are just too terrible. But they're some of the worst logistics I've ever encountered. So another very rich woman and 2 very rich women in Thailand want to marry me. One refuses to talk about anything. That's first problem. The second problem, I say, you're not talking. Her reply is, no, I talk too much. I say, you're saying nothing. She says she's talking too much. We have that conversation for a month. I'd like you to talk more. And she doesn't want to talk too much. I'm not sure where I can go with that. That's a very common thing with my experience with women. I say I would like this, and they tell me that men don't like it. Hello, I'm a man, and I like it. No, men hate this. What do you do with that? I know exactly what I want. I've put it directly with no basis for misunderstanding. Have I ever lied to you? Do I ever say I want this and when you give it to me then I say I don't like it? No. So where's this program coming in that I'm saying I want this and you're saying men don't like that? I want it, men don't like it, I want it. How long does that have to go on before it's a waste of time? I've run into that. Well, you talk too much? Goodbye. Oh, she was heartbroken. Oh, yeah, now you have something to say? Oh, nothing to say still. Okay. Be heartbroken somewhere else. This is enraging. I have too little expectations, too high expectations. See, these things are nuts. And at some point, it's just like, Lazaris, you've said a whole bunch of things and a whole bunch of tapes. Most of them don't work most of the time. Some of them seem crazy. Some of them seem destructive and crazy making. I don't get it was out of any particular bad intention. It just doesn't work very well. So it'd be nice if you had humility to be responsible for your impact and but you don't. That's, of course, irritating. There's other resources out there, so, get rid of that. That feels good, since there's no other option. You can't bring any of this up to concept synergy and have any dialogue. They're too shame-based. Lazaris shame tapes don't work with concept synergy. Who knows? This stuff is maddening. on multiple levels, right? Because at each point I'm wondering, this is not going the way I'd like. I don't want to break a woman's heart. I don't want to, but it is happening. I do not want to be with a mute, but it is happening. I don't want to be stuck between those choices, but it is happening. I don't want to be blamed for that, but Lazaris is saying that that's the case. Their techniques work and all this. It's just they don't work, but they do. I don't want to be recommended various tapes rather than you come here and figure out, the solution. You can do a tape and manifest. Okay, fine. I don't need to take the credit for finding a compatible woman. You find one for me. I'll give you all the credit if you can actually do it and show me how you do it. Great. Lazaris techniques work for you. Do it for yourself first, by the way. Oh, you can't do that? Oh, I see. Well, every marriage that I've been seen that's with a Lazaris friend, where I have gotten to know the man, has been furious with his Lazaris partner every single time. Oh, I do the Lazaris tapes and da-da-da. Well, I can say 100% of the married men that I encounter complain about their Lazaris friend wives. Is that Lazaris at its, techniques working? And I don't think, the things that work for me, like that book and the 250 conversations in Thailand and all that, that was a big step forward in some ways. Meaning my wonderful Thai vacations were filled with lovers. Just lovers that were 10% of what, or 30% or 50% of what I was looking for. Sex is apparently not hard to create, whether you're a metaphysician or not. Sex with compatible multidimensional conversations, very difficult. In the other extreme, I can find people who will talk for 5 or 6 hours with very little emotion and that are afraid of sex, but they'll have the mental conversation. And I can find hordes of people who will jump into bed and that do not want to talk about a single feeling. In fact, right now, the one Thai person I've stayed in contact with constantly writes to me, and I said, "Do you have any feelings you want to talk about?" "No, I don't want to talk about my feelings." Great. You just want to send photos back and forth. I say, "I would like to talk about," "Well, I'm not going to talk about my feelings." "Okay, goodbye." Well, she won't go. She'll just disrespect that, right? That's what I can expect in Thailand, my favorite country in many, many ways. I find trying to sort out all of this stuff to be very difficult. Now, I could diagnose and say that I am a repressed, regressed, traumatized child and an adolescent and a narcissist and have symptoms of PTSD. Okay, great. We've got the diagnosis. So what's the medicine? Listen to another Lazaris tape? If you believe in human nature and growth and evolution, you have to believe that given an opportunity, like I believe in tomatoes. If you put a tomato in the ground with a nice compost bowl of soil and water, you water it, you get a great tomato. I believe in tomatoes. If you give tomatoes optimal growing conditions, you get great tomatoes every time. At least 99% of the time. So I don't think we as a cult, whether it's the Lazaris cult or the American cult or the British cult, the Christian cult or whatever, I don't think we as a cult, as a pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being, are giving human beings what they need to grow in optimal conditions. I think we're giving maybe 20% optimal conditions and 80% toxic conditions. A toxin is simply an energy pattern that is at an extreme that is damaging to the energy pattern that's trying to grow, too acidic, too alkaline, too much electricity, too little electricity, right? The brain has a little bit of electricity. If you turn it off, you're brain dead. You put in 3,000 volts, your body's dead, right? It's too much or too little. So toxicities, unregulated energies, they're all around. I wake up and all this energy and stuff, it's toxic. It's too much of this and too little of that. So I think we're living in a 20% optimal environment, with 70, 80% toxicities that we lack the ability to fully understand, but which are crippling us, causing, severe damage in one form or another, and which we are creating actively through our pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being as a cult. Because to disintegrate, to dissociate from the cult, and say, I'm not going to do that because that creates this toxin, well, then you don't get a job, or you don't get to do this, or you can't fly, or you can't do this. That there's all these areas that in order to engage with the network that is other human beings, you have to engage with the systems defined by the cult, the unconscious, the unquestioned pattern. This is the way it is because it's the way it is. And that most of those systems are at toxic levels of one side or the other. They're devoid of all intimacy, or there's so much intimacy so fast you don't know what to do with it. They have no expectation, or there's so high expectations you can't get anywhere near them, right? I think most of the systems that I encounter are at toxic levels with no cult mechanism to respond to them. And the byproduct is miserable human beings that do not have a mechanism to transcend this. Like, I can sit in front of a camera and say all of this. I cannot do this in front of a single person that I know of. And I'm sick of paying therapists to just sit there at, $100-200 an hour and just say, you're right, or good job. And what's the suggestion? What are we going to do? Well, come back and see me next week. It's interesting the first 1,000 hours, but now, it's like, it's not enough. But it's what's available, and it's what's recommended. Go see a therapist. Don't talk to us about this. Go see a therapist, because they'll keep everything you're saying confidential. So the people who need to hear it will not hear it. Isn't it wonderful? How does that bring intimacy? If you pay me hundreds of dollars an hour, I will not tell anyone what you're saying. Great, so the only person who's not in my life knows everything about my life, and nobody else knows it, and nobody else wants to know it. What a great system for nobody knowing what's going on and being confused and being lonely. It's a wonderful system. We do it all the time. Create confused, lonely people. quite reliably. I expect more from an intelligent cult. But my cult informs me I expect too much. The women tell me, I've looked all my life. I know what you mean. I wanted someone who would grow more. I felt just like you feel towards men my whole dating career. Now I found you, but you're too much. You want, now you're telling me what I've told all these men that, let's think more, let's talk more. It's like, okay, so I'm too much. How boring. Again, right? I want an empathic, mentally present human relationship where we figure out what actually works rather than spouting dogmas and partner along those lines. This is apparently too much to ask. I'm asking for it. It's disappointing. Right? I desire it, I imagine it, I expect it, and I am heartbroken that it is blocked, usually for specifically those reasons, right? It takes about 4 hours a week to have a really attuned relationship. So there's all kinds of people who want to be my friend as long as we don't spend any time together. You want to be friends? Yes. You have 4 hours this week? Oh, I'm really busy watching TV. No, I don't. So let's not be friends. So you want to be one of those friends that doesn't know anything about each other. Yeah, join me on Facebook, right? We'll all perform for one another. Yeah, but I actually want to see and be seen. Oh, I don't have time for that. It's a joke, but it is our joke, right? This is the statistics of 70% chronically lonely people. I'm one of them. Not for lack of effort, but I'm not going to lock someone up in a cave so that I can spend enough time to actually see them clearly. That's some voluntary freedom around this. That's whether it's a Lazaris friends or otherwise, that tends to be the sticking point. Quality time. That happens to be one of the love languages. Spaciousness around time. It's critical. So this is an experiment. Meaning, this is way better. You could give it a try. This is way better than waking up this way, feeling I should go to therapy, calling a bunch of therapists and being put off by a number of them, then making an appointment for 2 weeks, driving there, paying hundreds of dollars, driving back, and probably not feeling this way on the day that you're driving there. So this is me waking up, noticing these things, not having to pay a therapist, actually telling the world what's going on rather than hiding what's going on. That seems better than therapy, right? As a therapist, nobody will ever know what you think and feel. Great, wonderful. I want intimacy. Into me you see, but nobody will see. I'll keep it completely confidential. Oh, aren't I lucky? So this is much better than that. Does it help you? Well, if it does, how? And, if it does, great. This saved me $400. And will it help me feel good for the rest of the day? Probably a little better. I think one of the reasons I'm counterphobic around fear is, I am literally imprisoned, cannot look at certain things in body memories and all of that. And it's maddening to know that I'm run by an invisible prison, that the bottom line is I cannot look here or I'll die, and it's a horrible way to live. It's just how most of us do live. We're just usually pretty good at keeping whatever it is we can't look at so far away that it doesn't threaten us, or we quickly move or change relationships so that we can pretend that it doesn't exist. But my suspicion is that it is there for everyone to one degree or another in this lifetime or another, that there's this dread, this thing that cannot be looked at. It's unspeakable. It's traumatic. And that we go to great lengths to avoid engaging with it individually and as a group and as a society, which means we are run by it because we have to go to all this energy to not deal with it. I think that's horrific. The underpinning of everything is we're committed not to see and do and feel these things and talk about it, and we have no friends that can go in there because we can't go in there and they don't want to talk about it and you don't either. I think that's a miserable, ghost of a life. Well, that's my view of my life, a miserable ghost of a life, darting around these little issues. Can't find a single person to actually explore them. Miserable. It's complete insanity. Just what it is. So maybe it helps you. At the very least, it gives me a sense that I'm confronting it. I may not be, meaning I haven't actually looked at what it is, that body, memory, and this whole thing. But it helps integrate. I have a little bit of sense of more clarity what's going on, and maybe my body feels that I understand it as well. So that's good. So I will go off to work now.